Tsim Sha Tsui, Kowloon. September 14th, 1967. 7:18 p.m. The evening air hung thick with humidity, and the distant smell of harbor water drifting through the open windows of the Junfan Gung Fu Institute. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the polished wooden floor where 37 men sat in uncomfortable silence, their breathing the only sound punctuating the tension that had been building for weeks. Most wore the simple black trousers and white shirts of traditional kung fu practitioners. A few carried the bearing of men who had never questioned their authority until tonight. Bruce Lee stood near the far wall, his back to the assembled masters, methodically adjusting the wooden dummy's arm positions with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. Each rotation, each angle correction, was performed with the kind of deliberate calm that suggested either supreme confidence or carefully controlled anxiety. The witnesses would later disagree about which. Wang Shunlong sat closest to the dummy, his weathered hands folded in his lap, eyes never leaving his former student. As Bruce's senior training partner under Ip Man, Wang had watched the younger man's evolution from promising apprentice to something that defied traditional categorization. Tonight would determine whether that evolution represented progress or a dangerous deviation from principles that had preserved Chinese martial arts for centuries. Master Lung Ting occupied the place of honor near the entrance, his reputation as keeper of orthodox Wing Chun methodology lending weight to whatever judgment would emerge from this gathering. Beside him, Hawkins Chung shifted uncomfortably, caught between his friendship with Bruce and his obligations to the traditional community that had never fully accepted either man's innovations. The remaining masters represented a cross-section of Hong Kong's most established kung fu schools: Northern Mantis, Southern Tiger, White Crane. Men who had trained when the Japanese occupied the territory, who remembered when martial arts meant survival rather than philosophy. The challenge had originated 3 weeks earlier at a tea house in the Central District. Master Chan Hua Shun, a 73-year-old practitioner whose lineage traced to the Shaolin Temple, had publicly questioned whether Bruce Lee's modifications constituted improvement or corruption. The comment had been reported and repeated until it became a formal accusation demanding a response. Young Lee treats centuries of wisdom as raw material for personal experiments, Chan had allegedly stated. Though witnesses disagreed on his exact words, Bruce had requested this meeting not to defend his innovations, but to demonstrate them. Under traditional protocol, masters seeking to challenge another teacher's methods could demand a practical exhibition. The challenger would select representatives to test the disputed techniques under controlled conditions, with senior masters serving as arbiters. These demonstrations rarely occurred, and seldom involved practitioners who had gained Bruce's level of attention from outside the Chinese martial arts community. The rules had been established through careful negotiation. Bruce would face 3 opponents selected by the assembled masters. Each engagement would last until one participant yielded, was unable to continue, or the arbiters declared a decisive outcome. No weapons, no striking to the face or throat, no techniques intended to cause permanent injury. Victory would be determined by clear control, superior positioning, or forced submission. The demonstration would either validate Bruce's approach or expose its limitations against traditionally trained opponents. Master Wang Jackman had arrived from San Francisco specifically for this gathering, his reputation as a northern stylist adding legitimacy to the proceedings. His presence suggested the Chinese martial arts community considered this demonstration significant enough to warrant international attention, though official records would later minimize the event's importance. Beside him sat Lao Bun, whose grandfather had taught Wang Fei Hung, connecting the evening to legendary figures whose stories had shaped popular understanding of kung fu for generations. The 3 challengers represented different approaches. Chen Wei Ming, 42, practiced Praying Mantis style, emphasizing traditional forms unchanged through generations. Tom Yu Ming, 38, specialized in White Crane techniques focusing on defensive positioning and counter-timing. Master Liu Zhenshan, 45, practiced Northern Longfist, known for extended techniques and space control through full contact experience. None of the three men harbored personal animosity toward Bruce Lee. They had accepted their roles as representatives of traditional methodology, understanding that their performance would be interpreted as evidence for or against the validity of classical training approaches. The weight of this responsibility showed in their measured breathing and the careful way they stretched their joints while waiting for the demonstration to begin. Bruce finished his adjustment of the wooden dummy and turned to face the assembled group. His movement carried none of the theatrical quality that had begun appearing in his recent television work. This was the economical rotation of someone who had spent countless hours practicing until efficiency became an unconscious habit. When he spoke, his Cantonese held traces of the Seattle accent that marked his American years, but his tone remained respectful in the manner that traditional etiquette demanded. "Masters, I appreciate your willingness to observe this demonstration. The questions raised about modified training methods deserve serious examination, and I accept the responsibility of proving their effectiveness under proper conditions. I request only that tonight's results be judged without regard for reputation or previous assumptions, allowing the techniques themselves to provide evidence for their value or limitations." Master Leung Ting nodded slowly, recognizing both the formal courtesy and the implicit challenge in Bruce's words. As a senior arbitrator, his acknowledgement would signal the beginning of proceedings that could reshape the understanding of what constituted legitimate martial arts development in the modern era. Master Chan Hua Shun stood, his voice measured. "Mr. Lee, will you accept that tonight's outcome may require modification of your methods, should results prove unfavorable?" Bruce responded without hesitation. "I've requested this demonstration because martial arts must prove themselves through application rather than theory. If traditional methods show clear superiority, I'll adjust accordingly. But I ask the same commitment from those judging my techniques." Wang Shunliang spoke with authority. "Some believe your changes represent a fundamental departure from Wing Chun principles, questioning whether what you teach remains Kung Fu. How do you address this?" "Wing Chun taught me centerline theory, simultaneous attack and defense, economy of movement. These remain central. But strict adherence to classical positions can create predictability that skilled opponents exploit. My modifications preserve core concepts while adapting expression to address weaknesses apparent when Wing Chun faces other systems." Master Liu Zhenshan walked to the center. Traditional forms contain responses to multiple attack methods developed over centuries. How can modified techniques, developed primarily through Wing Chun experience, address the full range of traditional forms that were designed to handle? Finally, Master Leung Ting called for the demonstration to begin. The three challengers moved to one side of the room, beginning their final preparations through stretching sequences that had been performed before countless training sessions and challenge matches. Bruce remained near the wooden dummy, his preparation limited to rolling his shoulders and taking several deep breaths that seemed to center his entire body around some internal focal point. Wang Shunleung took the position of primary arbitrator, with Masters Chan and Leung Ting flanking him as secondary judges. The remaining observers arranged themselves along the walls, creating maximum space in the center of the room. Several men pulled small notebooks from their pockets, intending to record details that might prove significant during later discussions about the evening's outcome. Chen Wei Ming, the Praying Mantis master, would engage Bruce first. His preparation included a brief sequence of hand conditioning exercises, striking his forearms against each other with controlled force to activate the calloused surfaces that traditional training had developed over decades. His breathing settled into the rhythmic pattern that preceded combat, each inhalation and exhalation timed to match the internal circulation that Chinese martial arts theory claimed would optimize physical performance. Bruce moved to his starting position, settling into a stance that appeared casual but positioned his weight for immediate movement in any direction. His hands hung loose at his sides, showing none of the formal positioning that traditional styles maintained during pre-combat preparation. To untrained observers, He appeared almost relaxed compared to Chen's obvious readiness for battle. Master Liung Ting looked to each participant, received acknowledgement from both, and spoke the command that would begin the first test of Bruce Lee's modifications against traditional Chinese martial arts methodology. Begin. Chen Wei-Ming launched immediately into a complex combination attack, his hands moving through the precise sequences that Praying Mantis forms had refined over centuries. Hook punches designed to trap opposing limbs, followed by straight attacks toward the center line, are finished with grappling attempts that would allow close-range techniques to disable the opponent. Each movement flowed into the next, with the kind of seamless connection that comes from repetition measured in decades rather than years. Bruce's response violated several traditional principles simultaneously. Instead of meeting Chen's attack with classical defensive positions, he moved laterally while striking, using what appeared to be a boxing jab to intercept Chen's lead hand before it could execute its intended trapping motion. His footwork borrowed from fencing, creating angles that traditional training had not prepared Chen to address. Within 3 seconds, Bruce had established a position outside Chen's optimal range while maintaining constant pressure through rapid, direct attacks that gave the Praying Mantis master no opportunity to execute his preferred techniques. Chen attempted to re-establish proper distance through classical footwork patterns, but Bruce's constant forward pressure prevented the space adjustment. When Chen tried to use traditional deflection methods to redirect Bruce's attacks, he discovered that the modified techniques recovered too quickly for classical counters to reach their targets. After 90 seconds of increasingly desperate attempts to implement his training, Chen found himself backed against the wall with Bruce controlling the center of the room. The conclusion came suddenly. Chen committed to a traditional Praying Mantis capture technique, reaching for Bruce's extended arm with both hands in a movement that had been successful countless times during training and previous challenge matches. But Bruce's arm wasn't where traditional responses expected it to be. His withdrawal timing had been modified to create a brief gap in Chen's defenses, and his counterattack reached Chen's shoulder with enough controlled force to demonstrate clear dominance without causing injury. Chen stepped back and bowed, acknowledging defeat with the grace that traditional training emphasized. His confusion was obvious, though he concealed it well. Techniques that had proven reliable for 20 years had been systematically neutralized by methods he couldn't immediately categorize or counter. Tam Yu Ming, the White Crane Master, approached his engagement with different tactics. Rather than attempting complex combinations, he focused on defensive positioning and counterattack timing, waiting for Bruce to commit to attacks that could be redirected and answered. His strategy recognized that traditional responses had failed against Bruce's modified approach, so patience and superior timing might succeed where confrontation had not. But Bruce had spent months training specifically for opponents who relied on defensive strategies. His attacks contained multiple layers of commitment, making it difficult for timing-based counters to identify the genuine threat among several simultaneous possibilities. When Tam attempted traditional White Crane deflections, he found himself responding to feints, while the actual attacks reached their targets through unguarded approaches. The engagement lasted less than 60 seconds. Tam's superior defensive skills prolonged the exchange compared to Chen's experience, but the outcome remained equally decisive. Bruce's modified techniques had addressed the specific weaknesses that defensive strategies could exploit, leaving Tam without effective options for regaining control of the confrontation. Master Liu Zhenshan, the Northern Longfist representative, had observed both previous engagements with a growing understanding of what made Bruce's approach effective. When his turn came, he attempted to use his system's extended range and circular techniques to maintain distance while pressuring Bruce with continuous attacks that would prevent close-range engagement. The strategy succeeded longer than either previous approach. Northern Longfist's emphasis on controlling space through extended techniques created genuine difficulty for Bruce's preferred close-range methods. For nearly 2 minutes, Liu maintained effective range while delivering attacks that forced Bruce to remain defensive. Several observers began to believe they were witnessing traditional methodology successfully countering Bruce's innovations. But close observation revealed that Bruce was studying Liu's movement patterns, timing, and recovery sequences, rather than simply defending against them. When he finally committed to closing distance, his approach demonstrated complete understanding of how Northern Longfist techniques created temporary vulnerabilities during their extended circular paths. His entry occurred at the precise moment when Liu's commitment to a wide circular attack left him unable to adjust for close-range defense. Once Bruce achieved close range, Liu's long-range techniques became liabilities rather than advantages. The engagement concluded when Bruce applied what appeared to be a simple Wing Chun trap, but executed with timing and pressure that traditional training had not prepared Liu to counter. The room fell completely silent. 3 masters, each representing decades of traditional training and proven combat effectiveness, had been systematically defeated by techniques they couldn't readily categorize or counter. The implications of these results would be debated for years, but the immediate facts were undeniable. Master Wang Jackman spoke first, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone choosing words carefully. "Mr. Li, your techniques were clearly effective tonight, but I must ask whether these results prove the superiority of your methods or simply demonstrate that traditional masters require different preparation when facing non-traditional approaches." Bruce's response showed none of the satisfaction that victory typically brought to challenge match winners. "Master Wang, I believe tonight's results demonstrate that martial arts effectiveness depends more on adaptability and practical testing than on adherence to traditional or non-traditional methods. Each system contains valuable principles, but rigid application of any system creates predictability that skilled opponents can exploit. The goal should be understanding combat principles deeply enough to apply them flexibly, rather than memorizing specific techniques." Several masters began speaking simultaneously, voices rising as the implications of the evening's demonstration became clear. Some argued that traditional methods had been unfairly tested against techniques specifically developed to counter them. Others contended that any martial art unable to adapt to new challenges had already failed its fundamental purpose of preparing practitioners for combat. Wang Shunliang called for silence, his authority as Bruce's senior training partner lending weight to his request for order. When the room quieted, he addressed the concerns that multiple masters had raised simultaneously. "Tonight's demonstration raises questions that our community must address honestly. We have seen traditional techniques, practiced by skilled masters, prove ineffective against modified approaches. This creates 2 possible interpretations. Either traditional training methods require supplementation to address contemporary challenges, or traditional methods remain valid, but require different application when facing non-traditional opponents." Master Chan Hua Shun stood slowly, his advanced age lending gravity to whatever judgment he would render. As the eldest master present, his opinion carried significance beyond his personal expertise. When he spoke, his words would influence how the Chinese martial arts community interpreted the evening's results. "I came here tonight believing that traditional methods, properly applied, would demonstrate clear superiority over experimental techniques. This has not occurred. But I am not prepared to conclude that centuries of accumulated knowledge should be abandoned based on one evening's demonstration. Instead, I believe we must examine why traditional approaches failed tonight and determine whether those failures represent fundamental flaws or simply inadequate preparation for new types of challenges." The discussion continued for 2 more hours, with masters analyzing specific techniques, questioning Bruce about his training methods, and debating the broader implications of traditional versus innovative approaches to martial arts development. Some participants left convinced that traditional training required substantial modification to remain effective. Others maintained that traditional methods remained valid, but needed supplemental preparation for contemporary applications. Bruce Lee departed before the final discussions concluded, understanding that his presence might inhibit honest evaluation of the evening's events. His demonstration had achieved its intended purpose of proving his techniques under controlled conditions, but the broader questions about tradition, innovation, and martial arts effectiveness would require resolution by the masters themselves. Official records of the September 14th demonstration were never compiled. The Hong Kong Chinese Martial Arts Association declined to document events that might encourage public challenge matches or suggest inadequacy in traditional training methods. Several participants kept private notes, but these were not shared beyond immediate students and close associates. In the months following the demonstration, 3 of the defeated masters quietly began supplementing their traditional training with modified techniques similar to those Bruce had employed. Others maintained their classical approaches while adjusting their tactical applications to address the vulnerabilities that had been exposed. A few refused to acknowledge that the demonstration had revealed anything significant about traditional martial arts effectiveness. Wong Jackman returned to San Francisco with detailed observations about Bruce's methods, later incorporating some of these insights into his own teaching, while maintaining the fundamental structure of his traditional system. His students reported subtle changes in training emphasis, with increased attention to adaptability and practical application rather than pure technical perfection. The demonstration's most significant impact may have been its influence on Bruce Lee's own development. Facing skilled traditional masters under formal conditions confirmed his belief that martial arts effectiveness required constant testing and modification rather than adherence to fixed methods. The experience strengthened his conviction that combat principles should guide technique selection rather than style loyalty or traditional authority. The evening at the Junfan Gung Fu Institute became part of Hong Kong martial arts folklore, though details varied significantly depending on who recounted the events. Some versions emphasized Bruce's domination of traditional masters, while others minimized the demonstration's significance or questioned the skill level of his opponents. The absence of official documentation allowed each faction to interpret the results according to their existing beliefs about traditional versus modern martial arts approaches. Perhaps the demonstration's lasting importance lies not in determining which approach was superior, but in establishing that martial arts effectiveness must be proven through application rather than assumed based on tradition or innovation. The masters who witnessed Bruce Lee's performance that evening were forced to confront the possibility that their assumptions about combat effectiveness might require examination, regardless of whether those assumptions were based on centuries of tradition or years of personal experimentation. The questions raised that night in Tsim Sha Tsui continue to influence martial arts development decades later. Every practitioner who tests their skills against unfamiliar opponents, every traditional master who adapts classical techniques for contemporary applications, and every innovator who seeks validation through practical demonstration is participating in the same conversation that began when 37 masters gathered to witness whether modified Wing Chun could prove itself against traditional Chinese martial arts. The room on Nathan Road where the demonstration occurred was converted to commercial use years later. But the questions examined there remain unanswered, perhaps unanswerable, because they touch fundamental issues about how human beings learn to fight, and whether that learning should be guided by accumulated wisdom or individual discovery. Some truths resist simple resolution, especially when they challenge beliefs that have shaped entire communities for generations. Share project content Brew V, created by you.